and kind of sets a good foundation for what we're going to read even more about. Always want to take a pause to just say thanks, for putting your time and investing into making this a great event. I feel like all VR events are kind of a co-created sort of space where we, share our time and wisdom together. So as always, thanks for being a part of that. And want to cover some norms for the event, since we do talk about some pretty deep topics. Just want to disclose, this is in no way like a replacement or meant to be therapy. Just kind of peer-to-peer sharing on opinions and observations as we go through the book. Please no fixing and advising if we get vulnerable and personal. Make space for that. Help us make space for that so that somebody doesn't feel pressured into accepting advice when they are, maybe disclosing something very emotional. It's always good to use kind of I statement hygiene. I think what I heard you say is this, or I feel such and such a way, rather than you said or you feel. Those kinds of statements can be inflammatory, like in a discussion, especially when somebody's sharing something that might be emotionally taxing to get out. We're going to keep your statements confidential. I'm not going to go to the karaoke event and be like, you'll never believe like what I heard. That's not what we're here for. But just be mindful that we are streaming so that we are able to share with our YouTube and Discord audience. So anything that does get said here will, of course, be in the stream as well. We have a raise hand feature, which I see KT's hands on the board, which is always good. And it's a great way to report something too. If there's some kind of discomfort in the environment, feel free to click our squirrel up there, like that little squirrel button. And if you can get that button clicked, it'll put your hand on the board where I'll notice something's going on. But we're a nice intimate group here too. So if you do want to just speak up, we'll make it work. The hand raise is just so we don't get those kind of verbal tennis matches going that are hard to break up when we want to share the microphone. If you are open to feedback or looking for, someone to share things that have worked in a similar situation, please just say so, that I am open to feedback or just ask a question. So if you want to invite that level of discussion, just let the group know, and otherwise we'll just be practicing our norms, making space for what you say. Feel free to join our open discussion on Discord. We're actually streaming the Discord chat there. So throughout the week, if anything comes up or you want to just continue the discussion on something we already discussed, there's a Discord chat channel for that traffic. So you're more than welcome to it. And, our founder of the BridgeMakers group is here too and is also an expert on these types of event norms. Is there anything that I didn't cover quite in the way it should be, or maybe excluded one? Does it sound good?
Oh, great. Thank you for helping us practice good prevention of trauma hygiene every week also.
Oh, you bet. Want to make sure that everybody has a comfortable experience in what can be an intense topic.
Yeah.
So Chapter 3 starts out where we introduce Dr. Scott Rausch. It's his kind of first appearance in the book with his field of study and the contributions he made to the study of trauma and mood disorders in a very interesting way. He is a neuroimaging specialist. So he specializes using tools like PET scan and fMRI. And in the time period that this book was written and that these studies were done, it was mostly the PET scan, with the fMRI technology kind of coming a little bit later. It was PET scans that were done for these particular studies. And the way they work is they irradiate a substance that can go into your body and kind of go to the areas that you're trying to image. So if you think of like a glucose or an oxygen, those are molecules that you can irradiate, and then as your body goes through the normal consumption process of glucose, sugar, or oxygen, that irradiated material, what it does is as the radiation decays, it throws out a positron. And when positrons collide with an electron, it creates a little gamma photon, two photons that sort of go opposite one another. And the PET scan is sensitive enough that it can pick up those photons, and that's where you get your image from. Now, you never really want to as a regular practice, put radiation in your body, but these are trace amounts. So a PET scan is, relatively the same amount of radiation you might experience getting like a dental X-ray, for example. So, not looking at long-term consequences of radiation here, and it's part of the process of being able to capture these images. And what makes them so special and what makes them different from X-rays is they capture soft tissue. So, now we can see ligaments and organs and, all of the muscle fibers. So where X-rays just gave us that kind of picture of our skeletal structure, now we can actually see organs, and if something, looks out of shape, or, if something's glowing because you put, a special formula in before we did the scan, and, you can find tumors and such that way. So incredible technology that is really not all that old if you think about it, just a little bit before most of our lifetimes, and not too much further back than that. Very new technology used in very new ways. And that set the stage for us to have this wonderful team up where it was Dr. Rausch that approached Dr. Vanderkolk and said, we're doing studies on mood disorders. We're doing these PET scans we're doing brain imagery on, people that are having mood disorders, and we're trying to get more information on like what's going on in the brain as you experience these different, psychological phenomenons. And of course, Dr. Vanderkolk was getting more famous at that time for his studies with trauma. And he asked 8 of his patients if they might be interested in the study, and all 8 patients volunteered. And, it just always makes me feel, so great about humanity when you hear these stories, because there's really not so much in it for the volunteer. It's really the data that they're, contributing to the study. So for them to go into this giant uncomfortable machine and breathe, the way the study works is you have an oxygen mask, and that oxygen mask has that special like irradiated oxygen. So you're like breathing radiation. And one of the patients even said, like, I hope that this leads to information that can help people in the future. And that really underscores the dedication at the beginning of the book for me, that Dr. Vanderkolk really did this, for the patients. He did this for groups like us, just to try to get a new angle and a more granular picture of like what's happening when there is trauma. So one of the volunteers that really stands out in the chapter goes by the name in the book of Marcia, and I'll go ahead and read this just absolutely heartbreaking story to kind of paint some context of what Marcia had been through. But, just a normal day. She woke up, got everybody ready to go to school, got in the car, and while she was driving, she heard the seatbelt buzzer start going off, and she realized her daughter didn't have her seatbelt on. So being the wonderful mother that she is, she wanted to fix that immediately. But when she reached over to put that seatbelt on, she didn't know she was approaching a red light. And the car, went into the intersection, was broadsided, flipped, one of the worst kinds of accidents. And her daughter didn't survive, but to add to that, she was also an expectant mother, and the unborn baby also did not survive the accident. So, just wow, right? Like, you're just 1 second is one side of your life, and then the next second is this side. So what Dr. Vanderkolk asked these patients to do is they were going to get the PET scan, and they had previously read this script of this story, of remembering their trauma. And then there was also a baseline script of them just kind of getting ready in the morning, like making coffee or something. And these scripts were then played for them while they were in the scan machine. And before Dr. Vanderkolk even got the scan results, Marcia's vitals jumped as soon as the script about the accident started. Blood pressure, heart rate, shallow breaths, very wide-eyed. And when she got out of the PET scan machine, Dr. Vanderkolk noticed that the shoulders were really hunched, this kind of meek posture. And, the baseline script had none of these effects, right? So, obviously a huge, kind of night and day difference. Something is definitely going on in the brain and the body between these two memories. So once these images do come back for the doctors to start studying, there's this fun anecdote in the book about how he hung the images on his refrigerator. So he would, make his coffee or make his meals, and throughout the day he would just park himself in front of the refrigerator and study these images. And here's what we found. So no real surprise on this one. This is the limbic system with the part of our brain called the amygdala, which is largely responsible for our emotional centers, where our emotions derive from and how emotions kind of inform the rest of the body. And also, it's kind of the scanning device, like our radar system. It's like what watches for things we should be concerned about. Like if you hear something rolling off a table and you turn and catch it without even really thinking, like that's your amygdala. Like your amygdala grabbed the steering wheel and caught, that marker, that highlighter that's like rolling off the table. So the PET scan showed that this limbic system with the amygdala and the hypothalamus also is the organ inside of our brain that releases all of our hormones. And it, of course, activated as well, because if the amygdala gets excited, what the hypothalamus does is it starts pumping adrenaline and cortisol, two hormones responsible for exciting our our nervous system and our muscles to respond in some way, to be ready. So this limbic system in the brain really lit up. And what I mean by lit up is the oxygen, or the brain uses oxygen like a fuel. So anything in your brain that's consuming large quantities of oxygen is like the part of your brain that's working the hardest in that moment. So if you think about it like a car, when you stomp on the gas, like it's consuming all of that gasoline to get the car moving. And that's what we're seeing here, is that irradiated oxygen that's feeding the PET scan imaging, that oxygen is being consumed the most in that area, that limbic area. So that's how we know, when these traumatic memories are being re-experienced as the PET scan is going on, this limbic system is glowing, like a giant light bulb. And that means that it's just churning because it's consuming all this oxygen. And this one was kind of a surprise for the doctor, is that the visual cortex lit up. And what this is meaning is that even though you're experiencing a memory, it's like your visual cortex is also processing that memory. So if you think about like vivid daydreams, where you sort of snap out of like whatever moment you're in, and suddenly you're in this like vivid imagination land, or just the vivid visual memory of a place that you've been. That also lit up the visual cortex. So as Marcia was re-experiencing this accident, the visual cortex was once again like processing the visual memory of that incident, which was not something that the doctor expected to see. And you can kind of imagine it too, because there's this phenomenon that is mostly applies to like combat soldiers, where they call it the 1,000-yard stare. And that's where, no matter what's in front of you, it's like you're kind of almost looking through it. Like your vision doesn't really lock on to anything. It's just kind of staring off into the horizon. And I thought we'd add like a little bit of humor with our dog Stains there. I don't know if you ever watched the show about dog training, but this dog was just an absolute thief of these cupcakes that they would always make. And they were trying to train the dog like not to eat the cupcakes. And part of the dog's training here was to have to like resist, the cupcakes, even though they were right in front of the poor guy. And he got that look, right? Like, oh my God, like how, he was really inside of his brain figuring out, like, how do I get myself to those cupcakes, without getting in trouble here. But that's the look, right? That look of like just being so inside your head that, you sort of don't have really motor control over what you're looking at anymore. And this was the really big surprise. So not only do we see what's active in the study, like the amygdala and the visual cortex, but we see what kind of goes inactive. So normally this Broca's area, which is responsible for our speech, how we formulate words and languages, what we choose to next. My Broca's area is probably lit up like a Christmas tree right now because I'm presenting. But in a traumatic re-experiencing, that Broca's area actually loses some capacity, and it's showing a very degraded amount of action for what they would have expected to see at this time. And this is really interesting because the implications of it are kind of an aha moment. Is when you are triggered and you are kind of re-experiencing some very difficult memory, it sort of steals this resource of your communication, your ability to communicate and formulate words. So you know how somebody says something's difficult to talk about? Like, that's literal. That's meant literally. Like, if someone's sharing a traumatic event, their brain switches, and now they're kind of like handicapped in a communication way, where they're stumbling over words, or just losing the ability to really describe and be articulate. And this really checks out, and it also becomes a deterrent, because what do we always say when something's difficult is find help and tell somebody. Well, your brain makes that hard by the nature of the experience itself. And there was a quote from Shakespeare that I'd like to try verbatim here, because Shakespeare just has a way with words. Oh, horror, horror, horror. Tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee. Confusion now hath made his masterpiece. And that was in regards to a character that was experiencing a really difficult moment. And, in reference to that, Shakespeare didn't have a PET scan, but he was just that much of a genius that he understood, human behavior and the human condition. And he knew when something was difficult to talk about, people sort of lost the ability to describe it. And this was another revelation from the scans, is that the right side of the brain becomes much more active than would normally be expected, and the left side sort of takes a break. And, the left brain is mostly responsible for what we might call like executive function. These are the precise body movements, the logical problem solving, thinking about what you're going to say if you have this, this meeting coming up that you need to be really influential and on point, doing math problems. And if you think about the right brain, this is like your more playful, like artistic side that can really think like abstractly, imagination. So it's interesting to me that the right side of the brain is handed this responsibility of navigating trauma, because it's the one that sort of loses logic. And it's another aspect of how it can be difficult to approach healing, because when you step into a traumatic memory, now you're sort of functioning with this completely different set of tools that you're not accustomed to navigating with. And it really takes practice, and it's an area where I think professional counseling can really help, because they're trained to understand that you're coming through this process for the first time, and they can kind of help as a guide through this, operating with a different, set of your brain components. So kind of putting everything that we've learned together on a palette here, or to put it another way, like the anatomy of a triggered trauma response. Let's first think about the baseline. So the hypothalamus is, off. It's not excited and activated. So it's kind of sitting there producing chemicals we talked about, like serotonin and dopamine, these kind of wellness, socially engaged type of hormones that tell your body everything's cool, nothing to be worried about. Your amygdala is just chilling. It's like frontal cortex has everything right now, so I'm just going to take a break and sit here and idle. In your Broca's area, it's functioning just like it normally would. Maybe you're on the phone, or you're typing up an email, and you're, thinking of what you would say in the email, and then that comes from that part of the brain too. In your visual cortex, it's not off in the sense that it's not, processing anything. It's very outwardly aimed, like you're looking at your computer, or you're walking down the street and you're watching for cars to come. It's very outward. Whereas if we go into our trauma response now, the hypothalamus gets activated, and now it's pumping these stress hormones into your body. So you're getting, adrenaline and cortisol, like we talked about earlier, and your amygdala switches on. So now you're looking around the environment. You've switched from, thinking about what you're going to make for dinner to, is there something that I need to be worried about? Is something behind me? What was that sound? It's like this instant switch to a more kind of paranoid and worried state. your Broca's area shuts down. So we just talked about how now it's like more difficult to communicate. It's more difficult to describe what's happening if you're with somebody. You have this new barrier of communicating your experience outwardly. And then your visual cortex turns inward now. So now it's like your ability to see your environment is now kind of superimposed with like these memories that are flooding back, and not even just necessarily images of like what happened, where this memory is coming from, but like, you have these fantasies about, oh, what should I have done? And you see yourself going through these motions of like, stopping the thing from happening. And then you get obsessive about replaying this thing over and over, like, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. And your visual cortex is actually playing these scenarios like a movie inside of your head. And that is all superimposed over, like, if you're, walking down the street on that kind of outward image. So I think this is really one of the foundational and fundamental points of the whole book, and the hypothesis that Dr. Vanderkolk is trying to prove is that when you have trauma, it's not a case of like, just get over it. Like, your brain literally switches, your whole entire body like operates differently now that you've gone into this really intense difficulty of a memory that's difficult to process. So this is our team that I've assembled to represent our trauma response and the loss of our executive function. So the hypothalamus, pops out these stress hormones that, now change us into this like almost Hulk-like figure, where, we have our strength is emphasized, and like our kind of aggressive type of solutions towards everything are emphasized. So now we have adrenaline in our body. We got cortisol that's going in and shutting down things like the digestive system. We don't need to digest while we're fighting or running, so let's just shut that down. You ever have indigestion while you're stressed out or going through a trauma response? That's another aspect of the way these hormones change our body. And then you have the amygdala, which we got our picture of the meerkats down there scanning the horizon, because that's now what the amygdala is doing. It's scanning the environment. It's listening. It's trying to get a gut feeling of like, where is there a threat? Is there somebody around the corner that's waiting for me? Not a thought that would have happened before we get this traumatic triggered response. And then our Broca's area turns off, so now we're tongue-tied, and our visual cortex is now has this competing tug of war going on, where you're kind of, processing what you're seeing, but you're also competing with these memories and these kind of fantasies and scenarios that are being produced by the memory. And that takes us into the next aspect, which is what you decide to do in these traumatic states. And when the amygdala, or our team trauma that we put together here and assembled, like the trauma Avengers, when they all get together and collectively decide what are we going to do about this situation, there's kind of a really narrow menu of things to choose from. One of them is fight. We've bulked up on adrenaline. We're ready. We're limber. We're ready to face whatever is in front of us. So if our team chooses to fight, we got all of these stress hormones ready to go. Our muscles are engaged, and that might be the choice. In flight, the same way. You want your muscles at their peak if you're going to start running away from something. So if you want to you choose to avoid what's in front of you, then flight might be the choice. And here's two very much lesser talked about trauma responses that I like to see included, one of which is freeze. If you know the famous story about the possums that kind of play dead to get out of danger, it's a really effective way to get out of trouble in the wild. Because if you think about it, if you're a possum and you're up against like a bear that's like maybe 8 times your body weight, you're not going to win that fight. Like, there's no sense in fighting. You're not going to outrun it. So what if I just play dead? And you know what? It works sometimes. Sometimes it confuses that bear, or the bear just thinks, maybe I don't want to, consume something that maybe has been dead longer than I'm aware of. So this can be a way to avoid danger, is to freeze up and to actually shut down. And fauna is one that I really hear about the least, but this is also a trauma response where you kind of might people please or shower somebody with compliments, because if you're sort of appeasing that party and putting them in good graces, like, it's very unlikely that they're going to want to do harm. So you're sort of proactively like buttering the situation up, so that it doesn't turn dangerous. And this can be a trauma response as well. And I see a couple of hand raises too. I know it's also possible to just knock the button. So I just want to check if there was any commentary, but if not, we'll just wait till open discussion. This wasn't mentioned in the book, but I was thinking about it as I was reading the chapter, which is the concept of talk therapy. And one of the reasons that I think it kind of stands as one of those foundational treatment options to talk to a professional therapist, because of what we talked about, where trauma turns off the what we call the Broca's area, which is the speech center of the brain. So we kind of go through our life like having this difficulty sharing one of the most foundational experiences in our life, right? Like, it's not comfortable to share. You don't want to necessarily start a first date with it, but it's important to talk about, right? But we've lost like the ability to articulate it. So when you ultimately do share it, it's going through a part of the brain that it's never been through before. Like you're experiencing and you're moving this experience through a totally new part of the brain that it's never touched. And that can be like a step and a pathway towards the healing journey, because now you're engaging like your full self, whereas this traumatic experience had never been through your visual, your speech process before. You've never like put it into words. So we have these kind of terms for it, like naming something, that's putting it into a word and letting your Broca center like feel for the first time that experience like in a really articulated way. And that can be very healing. Just an opinion, nothing that was coming straight from the book, but it made sense with my logic center. So I thought I'd share it. And that leads us to our inspirational quote for the day, which is, one day you will tell your story of how you were overcome, what you are going through now, and it will become part of someone else's survival guide. I just think that's so true. These little nuggets of wisdom that we're able to share with one another, could ultimately be like the tool that somebody says, wow, that's the one that's really going to work for me. So always engage that Broca center. That's what we're here to hear, your side of it, your experiences, your thoughts, because it can be that meaningful to somebody else. And with that, let's kind of take things into our open discussion area. So if anybody's brought some observations from chapter 3 or just has some reactions to some of the information that we shared. We're ready, to hear those shares. And we got Jimmy up on the board, but I don't know if that was perhaps just an accidental click there. I saw your avatar's a little bit AFK for the moment. So yeah, let's leave Jimmy up on the board and then go with KT next. See your hands up.
Yeah, I was trying to find the thing up there. One of the things I've read about and heard about with respect to talk therapy is that it doesn't always help you work through the trauma. I don't disagree that it's a good idea to talk through it, but that's why a lot of other treatment modalities came around. For example, EMDR, because simply talking about it didn't resolve the trauma. I agree with you, it's good to talk about, totally. But it may not be enough, is what I'm saying, I think. It's one of the reasons that he suggested things like yoga, things that are physical, somatic therapy. And I don't want to jump the gun, but I'll just say he's created a lot of very unique therapies to get you out of that spot. If you talk about it, but you're not able to process it properly, you can use another technique.
Yeah, thanks for kind of calling me out on my bias a little bit too there, because I started with talk therapy and it really did kind of get me in the direction that I had hoped to go. But just because it worked for me, does not mean it's a treatment that will work for everybody. And in fact, I have heard some people say, I just don't want to, week by week, continue to just dive so deep into this memory, it doesn't feel helpful for me. And that, it can be, everybody's own individual truth on how effective it is. So yeah, thanks for kind of bringing that angle to it. I wouldn't want anybody to walk away from the event feeling like, well, I didn't try talk therapy and that's on me. No, there's nothing like that here. We're just trying to advocate that it is a broad spectrum of treatments. And Dr. Vanderkolk in the book said it himself, that no one thing works for everybody. Everyone has to find what works for them.
And I'm not saying talk therapy isn't good. When I first married, I was in a situation where when I got real emotional, I lost my words. And I think that's exactly what you were describing earlier, that the Broca Center wasn't functioning for that. And my husband, bless his heart, would just sit there with me until my emotions calmed and regulated a bit, and insisted that we communicate with each other about it. And he would just wait patiently, lovingly, until I was able to go through with it again. And I got to where, because of him being there and doing that, I was able to work my way through the difficulty a little bit more and start being able to talk about something when I was really, really emotional. So I'm not saying that talk therapy isn't a good modality. It really is. And I think it's part of the process.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point there, which is the blessing, that you had a spouse who was very patient and understanding through it, because I think everything here is kind of like a practice, first there's an awareness of it, but the awareness is only the first step. It's now that you're aware of it, what do you do with the, prediction of this is, I know this is coming now. So what am I going to do when it happens? And being able to practice when your speech center is down, is something perhaps your spouse helped you through. And that's an enormous skill, right? To be able to still articulate through those types of memories. And I had some awareness over the weekend where I was in a situation at a restaurant, which I won't bore you with the details, but it really like triggered my a lot of traumatic experiencing. Like it was just so unfair. It took me back to that like wounded little kid that just everything was always his fault, even if he did it or not. And you know, my wife recognized that I had, you know, gotten into that state, you know, but we still had to go to the grocery store. And I just kind of followed her, you know, through the grocery store in this compromised state of like being in my own head with this, you know, this experience that's going on now. And I remember the visual cortex angle to it. Like, I would be in one section of the grocery store, and then I would get like into my head so much, we would end up like in another part of the grocery store. And in my visual sense of the term, it was like we teleported there. Like I would sort of snap into presence again and be like, I don't remember like point A to point B, you know, like, because I'm just so like visualizing like, oh, I should have told that guy this or that, you know. And so I do think, like, I don't really know how much of this book is considered, like, proof, you know, or, like, fact, but it just makes so much sense to me when I compare, like, the findings the book describes to, like, my own sort of experience of it. When you start reflecting, you're just like, it really makes sense, like, what their findings say to me.
Totally.
And yeah, sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent there. I saw Carl. I superimposed your hand raise over KT. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
No, it's fine. I you know, I love to sit back and make sure nobody's going to say what I say before I say it. So, I actually made a couple little notes of thoughts I had, and I'm going to try to weave them into like a single ramble here that all makes sense. I guess generally for context on myself and like mental health, really the only interface I've had with it, and I'm going to be 40 this year. When I was a teenager, I was in like a study like that we got paid for where it was like teens with depression, and it was double blind, so eventually I did find out that I was getting Prozac, not a placebo. But for a while there, I didn't even know. But it was a combo like talk therapy as well as the. And I've always looked back on that and wondered, you know, did the improvements around that time of my life happen because medicine, because just talking to somebody? I mean, I got a girlfriend and was more social than I'd ever been at that time, so. It's very hard to unpack like what part of it helps, you know, like perhaps I wouldn't have even been talkative with the therapist had I not been having those gains in my social life that made me feel like I had things to talk about. But just that general idea though of kind of talking it out and words being the solution, and not the only solution, not the total solution, but a part of getting there. I have really appreciated. Sorry, I'll get him when I'm done, but my dog keeps whining at me to go out the door. The oh, I'm glad I have the notes now too. So I really appreciate that we have kind of taken that mindset in general, and I have seen a lot of this book as feeling so far like reading some of the insights of the people who first started that push that was already to a degree normalized when I was growing up, you know. So I love going back and seeing that kind of early into the minds of the early you know, pushers of what we see now as normal. Calm down, dude. Please, wait a second. And I didn't really find a way, I guess, to loop this other thought I had in, but it was something that I directly had the thought of, like, while reading, and it came back up tonight, is the idea of, if the trauma is, activating these specific parts of the brain, and lately I've heard, I'm going to talk while I get him. He's being very insistent. It's activating like the visual and the language parts activation of the brain. Trying to get the door while talking made me stumble a bit there. But there we have, I don't know if it's been really studied or if it's just something that's kind of like one of those internet fun fact things, but like the idea of people who are like aphantasic, I think is the word, people who don't really see visually in their head, or there's another term that's similar for people who don't have like that inner monologue where, I'm constantly like debating myself in my head. I can't imagine kind of thinking without words, but apparently it's fairly common. A large subsection of people, that's how their brain works. So I just wonder if that would be a factor, or like even you would be less likely perhaps to have like that 1,000-yard stare PTSD flashback if you don't really think in images very much. So I'd be very curious if that's been at all explored, but I don't think it has been, just kind of by the nature of it,
Wow, I tell you what, if any of what we're doing here ever makes it out into the research teams, I hope that they do take your suggestion there, because that's fascinating to, study that as an aspect of whether or not, some people have a propensity to kind of absorb the trauma in different ways. Because that's a question that comes up in the book, is like, sometimes two people can go through, similar situations at similar ages, and one of them comes away, with the withdrawn side of what, you might imagine, and the other person is able to move through it, very quickly. And, I do think that's kind of an aspect of what would be interesting to study, is like, what is the difference, right? Like, how can somebody adjust, whereas another person, it just takes a longer pathway to get there. And, and in saying that, not advocating for one path over another, it's all just our individual journeys. There's no right or wrong.
Like meta studies of like already like a explosion of data collection and then studying that data kind of thing,
Yeah, and if there's a way to identify that brain style, without the ability to because I have friends where it comes up, right? It kind of comes up in meditation circles, because like a lot of meditations are, imagine yourself, in a grassy plain with the wind kind of like blowing, past your ear, and it's like some people are like, no, that does nothing for me. So that's a really good observation. And I really enjoy hearing people's pets through microphones. I don't know, always and I feel like it's such a fun, just, we're all in our houses. And I think, were you in the last event where I heard a child sneeze through the microphone? I thought
that was my kids. Yeah. Well, it's like a playground thing, and if you hear the audio changes, and my kids start fussing around in the kitchen, which is right next to my bedroom. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, yeah. Thanks, Carl, for that share. Really incredible observations. I see some movement from your avatar, Jimmy. Are you ready to share your thoughts? Is your mic operating and everything? You in a position where you could share?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
great.
yes. Sorry, I know my name's not on the board there, but yeah. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, we saw your hand raise earlier, but it looked like maybe you had to step away for a second, so we just kept you up there in case you were ready.
Yes. Okay. So, So I was thinking about how the events lead to trauma, much like in some ways how our experience kind of focuses on the decisions we make. We go through an experience, whether it be positive or negative, and then our decision making may be influenced by that. So if trauma operates much in the same way, it kind of gives a credence into free will versus no free will. There are some people out there who believe that everything that all of our decisions that we make are subject to everything that we have as a past experience. And if you follow that to an extreme, that can lead into an absence of free will, where everything that we are on track was basically begin from our childhood, even pre-childhood. So if everything is subject to that, then it's quite possible that it does give more argument for no free will. I know this is like a huge can of worms to get into, so I don't expect to to discuss it fully. But I don't know. It was just a thought that happened to pop up.
Oh man, I'm always down for some philosophy like that. Like I do think there is a huge component to what you're saying, because I couldn't help myself. Like, is a lot of times like a feature of having trauma, because we can sometimes feel helpless when something does come back, and we do go through these experiences that were laid out, and how our brain changes and our mood, and how we suddenly see the world as like threat, not threat. And the decisions we make in those moments, like a lot of times they're destructive and they're not helpful, and they can lead to a sense of shame. Why did I behave that way again? And I think one of the coping mechanisms for that can be like, I've lost control. Like I couldn't control myself. And this is a big part of what I try to practice too, is like, okay, I've arrived, I've now recognized that I've arrived in this triggered state. I'm mad as heck and I'm not going to take it anymore. That it's starting. It's all like starting to go through its motions. And, this internal dialogue is happening. Like, I can make different choices now because I have an awareness, I have a practice. Maybe I cut my finger on the tape dispenser. Throwing the tape dispenser out is maybe something that crosses my mind, but it's not productive, right? So I can be like, oh gosh, that's that little immature, wounded child inside of me that just wants to throw the tape dispenser in the garbage. And I can be like, I'm here for you now, and let's just keep the tape dispenser where it is and find a Band-Aid and, start making those more rational. And like, I'm almost kind of wondering, like, now we can go back and argue all day long whether this is just a whole nother layer of not free will, right? but for the purpose of the question, what I'm saying is like, you're sort of graduating to a free will because now your practice is like expanding your options. And this is something I'm striving so much towards, because I'm not sitting here in front of this presentation as like I figured it out. Like I never get triggered anymore. I don't make poor decisions. Like, no, I'm human, and I'm here like in every way that means, and I have my struggles. But what I am trying to practice is when they do happen, can I increase the colors in my palette so that I can make different, more constructive decisions, even though my body's demanding I just throw that tape dispenser in the garbage.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, wonderful. I always bring these philosophical questions. They're super exciting. And let's see. We got Hey up on the board. Hey is next. Yep. Yeah, go ahead and take the mic there, Hey.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the conversation on what the alternatives are to talk therapy. The study I just posted in the chat there, you can see a little summary up there, is one of the most interesting studies I've ever read. It felt like it almost transcended the somewhat droll logic of research studies. It's kind of an adventure to go through the journey of what they discovered, but just re-emphasizing what we're talking about around somatic awareness, and that these veterans qualified as having PTSD, and then they were just put in a music room, not with drums but just with all instruments, and they naturally very quickly gravitated to the drums. And then what they found, the people who, and I'm not sure if this is the same study or adjacent to it, because the original one I can't find in my database, so I just found this one. But the one that I read, they basically they took people who were music therapists and they analyzed the beats that they were doing, and the beats that they
Hmm.
were doing actually mimicked the physiological response of trauma. And people who
Hmm.
had never shared or talked in any kind of group therapy were able to actually tell the story of the loud noises of their trauma off of the drums. And they would
Hmm.
have these whole conversations with beats with each other instead of talking. And by the end of this very short window of time where they were just analyzing the effect of music therapy, most of the participants had dropped below the threshold to qualify for PTSD. And then even a year follow up, there were still a majority of participants below that threshold. And so not only was there
Wow.
a profound effect in reducing that nervous system cycle, but there was also a extended effect, which you don't see with a lot of these short-term therapies. That maybe they can alleviate some symptoms short term, but long term there's other consequences sometimes. So it really took me to another level in my own training to understand that um, our nervous system is half of the equation. And if we do have that spoken word piece shut down, there are ways to subvert that and still get the trauma out and find some healing. And yeah, it was an extraordinary story. I think I actually cried at the end of reading it. I've never had that happen with a research study. I was just like, oh my
Oh,
God, this is
Wow.
revolutionary. Why is
wow.
this not bigger in the world, that our bodies know how to heal themselves? And that's a blanket statement. And, we couldn't necessarily put the mom with the kid and the death, in a drum circle and that be good for her. But I think specifically for thinking about the power of social healing, this was a whole other way for me to think about how we communicate and how we tell our pain to each other.
That is such an incredible just discovery. I'm looking forward to reading about it now because I hadn't heard about drumming and well musical instruments as a broader term, but that they gravitated towards the drums. Like I can see why you had an emotional I'm having an emotional reaction just hearing you talk about it. Like
Yeah.
it sounds wonderful, and I can't wait to get the details.
It also made me realize how much music maybe hasn't resonated for me as much throughout my life because it wasn't as organic. And so just the story of that idea of people being given the chance to find their own healing and build their own container with each other and lose the words and still find themselves. It sounded very even moving in this version of the study I read. It was really powerful for the researchers to go through this. Like they were very changed by the experience. You can imagine
Hmm.
the sound of bombs. You know, these people were using these drums to mimic the traumas. And so the disruption and the
Hmm.
chaos that would be coming out of that, and also the emotion that echoed. There was one scene I remember where one person would start to drum after having not participated, and everybody else would stop drumming and they would listen, and then the first person would stop, and then the whole group would mimic that sound back to them. They would beat it
Hmm.
back to them. And if you can imagine that validation of, we hear you, we see you, we're not going to be condescending about it, we're just going to amplify it to show you we get it. I just think that is such a stunning example of finding a rhythm again when we're this disrupted.
Yeah.
There's so many layers to this, right? Because like it's also language, but not language in this traditional sense that we think of. So you're processing something with your like language areas of your whole makeup, but it's not like verbal. It's like this really dramatic like body sound making, and but also social. Like that's the part that I feel like is really is getting to me, is like all of these people in one space like sharing this new language that is finally allowing them to describe something they've never been able to say. Like, whoa. Like my mind's blown.
Right? Like if you think of the beats of that, it's cutting through the isolation, and it's saying we
Yeah.
can see each other without leaning on this concept of talk therapy, which, technically for these people who are survivors of trauma, talk failed. That's how they ended up in the situation of being traumatized, collectively. And so I can imagine that there is a considerable resentment towards the idea of talk therapy. I had to kill people because talk didn't work, and now you're going to say it's going to heal me. Like, so I so appreciate like what that teaches us about trusting our bodies, and finding creative ways to express the natural passion and chaos and anger and rage that comes through us in those violating moments.
Yeah, I wonder if you're onto something too, which is like this language approach to like a group oriented healing. And this is going to sound really left field to bring, but this reminded me of a Star Trek episode where a peacekeeper, like he was nonverbal, he was mute, but he had these like telepathic companions that spoke for him. So he would speak like through these three companions he had, but in the process of this peace negotiation, these companions were like killed in a terrorist attack. So suddenly like he had no way to verbalize like what he was trying to negotiate for this peace. And his solution was that, party number one over here and party number two over here, you now need to learn sign language to understand me. And I was like, whoa, like that is so interesting to kind of make learning a new language the next step, like in the negotiation process. And it's kind of like intertwining with what you shared, is like how, it's just new to me. I've never thought about it in this space. So like I'm digesting like the possibilities of how you can incorporate languages into a healing process.
Yeah. Body language, right? Nonverbals are 80% of how we communicate. And so how do we actually like learn to track our body language to understand the tangles we get into with each other, and also unwind out of those tangles and sometimes those rips and ruptures that happen?
Yeah, there's this movie I watched. It's called We Met in Virtual Reality, and it's kind of about VR chat culture. So it has all the natural, like, people meet and get married. You hang out and you have these kind of like super shenanigan kind of experiences that you can only have in VR. Like working in a VR McDonald's or something. These are like really serious. But there was one community that was the sign language community, and there's a scene in that movie where a girl is saying goodbye to her brother who had passed away, like in sign language, before she like releases this VR lantern. And the way that you can see the expression like come out of her body, like through her avatar, like, it's all kind of connecting for me now, like what you're saying, like how important body language is to like expressing these kind of really emotional things.
Yeah, there's so much I could say more on that, but I like that seed is planting, because I think we look for the most obvious parts because that seems the most concrete, but that's not necessarily where the healing happens. And it's not just what the body language is saying, but it's also about the alignment of the body language with the words. And many times when there are traumatic kind of patterns, you'll see the body language switch. So somebody who normally nods their head when they're saying yes, they'll start to shake their head when they're saying no. And that can be a sign of a boundary issue there, where my body's signaling, hey, I don't want to do this, but my brain is telling me I should. And then what happens in the people around is they start to get their nervous systems activated because a pattern has shifted, but they don't know consciously that they're reading something different. They're still hearing the same messaging, but their bodies are alerting to them, I don't trust you as much. And if we're not conscious of that shift, then we start to tell stories about each other. This person is not trustworthy.
Yeah, it's reminded me of learning Japanese, where in Japanese culture they'll almost always say yes, but there's different forms of yeses. Like you have to understand the body language and the context of the yes that you're receiving, because that's part of how boundaries are communicated in Japan, and it's important to know that. Yeah, wow. Fascinating. Like, yeah, I'm really dumbfounded. This one is something I'll be thinking upon. I'm sure of it.
Yay.
And yeah, let's see. I know we went through the board here, and I don't see additional hand raises, but we had some great discussion. Any kind of final closing comments or something we didn't touch on? We still got, some space to talk. But if not, that was a wonderful review of Chapter 3. I was really excited about this chapter, and yeah, it definitely delivered a fun discussion. Really happy.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you too. Thank you. Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll put the room back on a normal volume so we're not blasting each other with a megaphone. And feel free to hang out as